now standing in front of the Ford Mansion here in Morristown, New Jersey. We're just down the street, literally, from the Schuyler Hamilton house. As I mentioned, this home was finished in 1774, and this is 2020, and this home is still standing and in beautiful condition, mainly because it's been under constant maintenance by the National Park Service and the Washington Association. Now, I spoke before about Jacob Ford and Theodosia and how Jacob Ford catches pneumonia in 1777 and unfortunately dies. Well, 2 years later in 1779, in December, Washington comes back to New Jersey for the second winter encampment. Again, New Jersey, the location, the British are going to be wintering in New York City. Washington he comes here defensively. It's a great place, as I mentioned, the Watchung Mountains. Plus, this winter, Washington's army is going to be in this 1,400-acre area that's called Jockey Hollow that we're going to go to next. Meanwhile, Washington needs a place for himself. Usually in colonial times during wars, generals stayed in private homes. And I think it's safe to say without question this is the largest private home in this area back in 1779. General Nathaniel Greene was given the assignment of finding winter quarters for George Washington. Comes to this home, he knocks on the door. Theodosia is asked, may General Washington use your home for his winter headquarters? Now, she could have said no. She had that option, but she was a patriot and she said, yes, he may. Now remember, her husband is killed during the war, not by a bullet, by pneumonia, but nonetheless killed. But she says yes, and what this meant was wherever Washington and his staff and his aides were in this home, that's considered military property, so the Fords are not to be in those parts of their own home. But Theodosia was okay with that. So here comes George Washington with his 18 servants. How many of you have 18 servants? How many of you have one? Well, listen, if you have 18, I'm adoptable, call me. So, and not only does Washington come with his 18 servants, but he comes with 5 what are called aides de camp. An aide de camp is like an executive assistant, and of those 5, one of those 5 was Alexander Hamilton. So Hamilton lives here the entire time with Washington. We're talking December of 1779, leaving in June of 1780, so a little over six months. So we're going to take a walk up to the front door because I actually find this door to be pretty fascinating. Now, take a look at this house. Notice the symmetry. This home, as I said, has been under constant maintenance. In 1783, just about 100 years after this home was finished, the descendants of the Ford family decided they didn't want to live here anymore for whatever the reasons. Eventually, this home is bought at auction by some businessmen here in Morristown who got together and formed what's called the Washington Association. I'm a member, I'm happy to say. And they ran the home until 1933 when the Depression's going on and they just really couldn't afford it. So the Park Service took over, but the Washington Association is still works with the Park Service in maintaining this home. And they do a tremendous job because if you think about it, we're talking a wooden structure, basically, and it still, as you can see, is in terrific condition. So this door, it's called a Dutch door or a split door, and what happens is you can open the top part and keep the bottom part closed. Now in the back of the house there is an identical door. So in the summertime, when it's really hot, you can open the 2 tops to get some kind of cross ventilation, but you can keep the bottom part closed. It keeps out the leaves and the squirrels and whatever. As you go inside, there are about maybe 9 or 10 pieces still in this home that were here when Washington stayed here. Now this is where I give tours. I'm here most Thursdays. I'm a volunteer here. And I've had just some wonderful experiences leading people through. First of all, I meet people, and what's really kind of interesting is it's rare when I do not have a tour on any given day that no one says, you know, I've driven by this place every day for 20 years, I've never stepped foot inside. Today I decided I was going to. And I get this a lot, and that's okay. It's great to have people come in. It's a wonderful piece of our history that you can really only find in Morristown. Now there are other homes, if you will, where Washington slept, but in this case, not where he slept for 6 months and not in the condition that this home is in. Which leads me to George Washington slept here. You know, that's become kind of a running joke almost. And one day I got curious, where did all this come from? Where did this start? So, like most research that I do when I write my lectures and so on and so forth, this was a tough one. But it seems to have started with a movie that came out in the early 1940s starring Jack Benny. And the movie was called George Washington Slept Here. And it was about trying to sell a house and kind of using that as a way to make a sale. And somehow that caught on. And I can't find anything earlier than that or anything more definitive than that. But you know, the war lasted 8 years. Think about that for a second. Washington had to sleep somewhere. Who sleeps in this house? Well, of course, George Washington, because we just spoke about him. 2 other people, one Alexander Hamilton, who I mentioned, but a third person who I have not mentioned, and that is Martha Washington. Martha Washington slept in this home with her husband. You know, as I said, the war lasted 8 years. George did not go home to Mount Vernon for 6 years. The only way Martha and George could be together was for Martha to come to wherever George was. Now remember I said, during the winter encampments, the armies are for the most part stationary. So every winter of the war, wherever her husband was, that's where Martha went. So she comes to the Ford Mansion, just like every winter of the war, wherever her husband was, and she stays here with her husband. So those 3 people, and the Marquis de Lafayette, he comes back here, as we saw in the statue, he comes back here in May of 1780. He stays in this house for a short period of time. In 1824, the Marquis de Lafayette comes back to America. Almost like a victory lap. He was greeted by thousands of people all over, wherever he went. And he comes here back to the Ford Mansion to pay his respects to Theodosia Ford. And she passes away a month or 2 later. It's kind of a sweet story. So now we're heading towards what's called the museum, inside of which are a large number of Revolutionary War, George Washington related artifacts. There is a fantastic video on the soldier's life at Jockey Hollow, which we're going to go up to next. And by the way, that video is also at the visitor center at Jockey Hollow. There is a hands-on exhibit that's relatively new at the Discovery History Center. So bring your kids, or if you're my age, bring your grandchildren. So where I'm standing now, behind me is the back of the Ford Mansion. Notice the symmetry in the windows. This was very big in architecture back then. You can see this beautiful area, and I've been asked, were any of these trees here when George Washington stayed here, and the answer is no. The trees are old, but I don't think they're quite that old. As we turn around now is the museum, or the visitor center, inside of which are a large number of Revolutionary War, George Washington related artifacts. We've got a video about the soldier's life at Jockey Hollow, and there's a Discovery History Center, which is great for, well, if you're my age, your grandchildren, but your kids and yourself. And if the front of the museum looks vaguely familiar, but you're not quite sure why, the architect designed it after Mount Vernon. So that is what you're seeing without maybe realizing what you're seeing. So we're standing across the street from the Ford Mansion, And this is where Washington's guards camped. They were called life guards. There were about 250 of them. Some were in the house while Washington was there. And of course, Washington's security was always very important. And it's a good thing because in February of 1780, while Washington is here, the British send some men to try to kidnap George Washington.